Secretary Matthew Rooney from the Department of State. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Mexico, Canada, and Trade Policy.
That's correct.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much,
Good.
Ambassador Shapiro. It's great to be here. Pleasure to see you again, and it's a pleasure to be here in San Diego with you.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you could make it, and thank you for being awake despite you're 3 hours ahead or something like this. Let me ask you, this year's Mexican elections.
Yeah.
How do you see this affecting our bilateral relationship?
You know, it's an interesting thing. I mean, as you know, Mexican elections and our elections coincide every 12 years because of the cycles. And I think we've reached the point in our relationship with Mexico where both democracies are mature enough that we don't anticipate there to be a huge change in our ability to do what we're set out to achieve in Mexico. We think that all the parties across the spectrum have an equal commitment to the fight against the cartels, and we're perfectly happy to work with whatever candidate comes out on top.
So let me ask you for the record, do we have a candidate that we're...
We do not have a candidate, and in fact, to prove that we did not have a candidate, Vice President Biden went to Mexico City not long ago and had meetings with all of the three major candidates in alphabetical order to make clear that there was no preference. All the meetings lasted the same amount of time. And that was specifically intended on our part as a gesture to make clear to everybody that we have no preference among those candidates.
And is you mentioned our commitment to the war against drugs. Is that our #1 issue? Is that the litmus test?
I don't know that I would call it the litmus test. I don't like to think of it as the #1 issue because our relationship with Mexico is so diverse and so multifaceted. It's certainly the element of the relationship that gets the most press play. It's the element of the relationship that represents a large commitment of tax resources by the United States, so it gets a lot of policy attention. But Mexico is our second largest trading partner, our third largest supplier of energy. Large numbers of Americans have Mexican forebears. Large numbers of people cross the U.S.-Mexico border every day. It's a huge partner.
Including you.
Including me, twice today. It's a huge partner with a very complex and important relationship with the United States.
Mexicans are concerned that the U.S. press magnifies violence in Mexico, and that our travel advisory, hurts them, hurts business, hurts their ability to do things. How did you explain that to the Mexicans you met with this morning?
The travel advisory thing is kind of hard. We have an obligation as a government to inform our citizens in a reasoned way about factors that they need to have in mind when they travel outside the United States. And so, and we have procedures internally for our people who are stationed in Mexico that are designed to help them keep safe in the environment that exists in Mexico. And we have a legal obligation not to have a policy for our own people that we don't communicate to the American public. So that puts us in the position of having to report factually on what's happening in Mexico. If you look at the last travel warning, we tried very hard to make it very specific, to make clear what areas seem to be most affected by violence, what areas seem to be spared by violence. And in fact, at the end of the day, the Mexican government, we consulted with them carefully before we issued that warning, conceded that it was a faithful rendering of the situation.
There was a long article in the Washington Post earlier this week that talked about Mexico has become, or soon will become, depending on whose statistics you believe, a majority middle-class country. How does that affect us, and how does that affect the United States in terms of trade, in terms of our relationship with Mexico? How does that demographic change affect us?
Yeah, it's huge, and I mean, you see it already. If you talk to our border patrol people along our southwestern border, the number of people that are attempting to cross the border illegally from Mexico into the United States is a fraction of what it was just 5 years ago. Some of that has to do with our own economic situation of the last several years, but a lot of it has to do with the rise of a middle class in Mexico, and by the way, elsewhere in Latin America. Which has created economic opportunities for Mexicans in Mexico and has reduced a lot of the incentives that used to exist for immigration from Mexico. But really the impact is much greater than that because it creates a whole society of consumers for the kind of stuff that the United States produces. Cars, TVs, electronics of all kinds. You have huge markets for those things as the purchasing power of Mexicans increases. So it represents an enormous new economic opportunity for us.
Now, you taught me, if I'm not mistaken, that in
It's
economic...
hard to believe that I would have taught you anything, Ambassador Shapiro.
You taught me a thing or two, that in economic terms, tourism is an export. That if Mexican tourists come here and eat at our restaurants and stay at our hotels and go to our amusement parks and shop at our shopping malls, that's really an export.
Those are exports, absolutely.
Which then brings me to the border. How come we can't facilitate that? How come we can't make it easier? I also crossed the border twice today. How come we can't make it easier for Mexicans to come here and spend their money?
Well, we're trying, and I know that that sounds empty to somebody who lives along the border and crosses it every day. It's a complex problem that has a lot to do with the concerns that arose in the United States over security, not just of the U.S.-Mexico border, but in general following September 11th. And the controls that we instituted on travelers entering the United States across the board. We have tried over the last 2 years, the two governments at the highest levels have made a commitment to work together to improve conditions for getting legitimate trade and tourism across the border. We have issued new permits. We issued 3 new permits last year for border crossings, the first new border crossings in a decade. We issued one of those 3 was for a rail crossing. The first new rail crossing since before the Mexican Revolution.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding. And so we are trying. One of those permits was for a very innovative project here in the San Diego area, which would be essentially an airport terminal at the Tijuana airport that crosses the border, where a passenger can arrive at the airport in the United States, clear customs, walk across the border in an enclosed space and go directly to the Tijuana airport to take a flight, or conversely to arrive in Tijuana and enter the United States. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to do that represents really quite a creative new thinking. It's extremely difficult because it has to do with the way budgets are managed on both sides of the border, which is different. It has to do with our own budget problems that affect our ability to build the infrastructure and hire the people that we need. So I don't want to promise that we're going to have this done by the end of the week, but we certainly understand
next week.
Maybe next week. We certainly understand the question, and as I say, President Calderon was in Washington in May of 2010, and the 2 presidents issued a declaration on 21st century border management. And since that time, the 2 governments have been working very hard together to try to fix these problems.
That's great. Let me ask you one last question. I'm going to change the topic completely because I know you're intimately involved with the Summit of the Americas that's coming up in Cartagena, Colombia, in April 15th.
April 14, 15.
14, 15. What do we expect to see out of that?
You know, President Obama went to his first Summit of the Americas, the last summit 3 years ago, in office only 90 days, and issued a call really to his counterparts in the hemisphere for partnership, issued an invitation for a partnership, a true partnership where we're not the teachers, they're not the students. We're going to recognize that we have shared responsibilities and shared responsibilities for common problems and try to find common solutions. And so what we're going to do, what the United States is going to do at the summit in Cartagena, is really point to a 3-year record of having done that. We've done that in areas like the border process with Mexico. We have a similar process going with Canada. We have regulatory cooperation processes with both Mexico and Canada that we're trying to merge. We have training programs for customs officers throughout the hemisphere. We've been working very closely with the nations of Central America and the Andes to merge their electrical markets and their electrical grids. We've got really quite a record, I think, under this administration of actually trying to do things in partnership, trying to work together with partners to identify common solutions to shared problems. And so we're going to go to the summit with what we think is a strong record along those lines. We're going to have some new things in our back pocket that we're going to roll out at the summit that will be next steps in all of these things, and that will enable us to, 3 years later, to point to all we will have achieved in the meantime.
Okay, so what are those things in your back pocket?
Those things are in the president's back pocket, and I'm not taking them out tonight.
Okay. You're very diplomatic. Excellent. Secretary Rooney, I want to thank you, and once again, welcome to San Diego.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate
Messer. It's a pleasure.
This is great.
Thanks.